The blizzard screamed through the endless plains like a living thing, tearing through the night with icy claws. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and every gust seemed to whisper warnings through the cracks in the wood. Inside, the rancher sat alone by the fire, his face lit by the flicker of the dying flames. He had known many winters, but never one this fierce or this lonely. Then, through the howl of the wind, came a sound that made his blood run colder than the storm itself, a faint knocking at the door. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks, the wood groaning beneath the storm's rage. But the sound came again at 3 slow knocks, weak yet desperate. He rose slowly, the floorboards creaking under his boots. His hand hovered over the rifle leaning against the wall. Out here, miles from town, a man couldn't afford blind trust. The plains were cruel, and the desperate did desperate things. He moved to the door and called out, "Who's there?" No answer, only the wind's moan in reply. Then, so faint he almost missed it, came a voice, a woman's voice, trembling, cracked, and raw from the cold. "Please, see Broken Bar, let me in. I'm freezing, a Broken Bar, I beg you." The rancher's heart pounded. A woman, out here, in this storm? Impossible. He hesitated, gripping the rifle tighter. "Who are you?" he shouted. Silence followed. Then a whisper that crawled through the cracks of the door like smoke. "I will reward you. Please, see Broken Bar, help me." He unlatched the top window of the door just enough to peer outside. What he saw made him forget to breathe. A figure stood hunched against the snow, draped in torn, filthy cloth. Her hair was a tangled black mass crusted with ice, her face pale and hollow, her lips trembling as frost clung to them. She was barefoot in the snow, and the sight of her small, bleeding feet struck something deep inside him that no winter could freeze. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. Her eyes lifted, dark and wide, filled with pain that words couldn't hold. "The mountains," she gasped. "They took my people. I ran a Broken Bar, I kept running." She pressed a trembling hand to the door. "Please, see Broken Bar, I'll die if you don't open." For a long moment, the rancher stood still, the storm wailing around him like a chorus of ghosts. He thought of the laws, the soldiers, the warnings about harboring an Apache. But then he looked again at her shaking hands, her blue lips, the faint line of tears frozen on her cheeks, and something broke inside his chest. He threw open the door. The wind howled in like a beast, snow swirling across the floor. The woman stumbled forward, falling to her knees on the wooden boards. He dropped the rifle and shut the door behind her, bolting it tight. "God help you," he muttered, pulling her up. She was ice cold, her skin burning with frostbite. He grabbed an old wool blanket and wrapped it around her shaking body, guiding her toward the fire. She sank down near the flames, curling into herself, her breath shallow and ragged. Steam rose from the soaked rags she wore. For a long time, neither spoke. He fed more wood into the fire, watching as color slowly returned to her face. When she finally opened her eyes fully, there was gratitude and something else, some old, untamed fire behind them. "You saved me," she whispered. "No one else would." He shook his head. "You shouldn't have been out there. You'd have frozen before dawn." She looked into the fire, her voice barely more than a breath. "I had nowhere else to go. The soldiers a Broken Bar, they destroyed everything. My home, my people. I walked until my legs gave out." Then she turned her gaze toward him. "I have nothing left to give you, a Broken Bar, but I'll keep my promise. I'll reward you." He frowned, confused. "You don't owe me anything." But she shook her head, gripping the edge of the blanket. "A promise is sacred," she said softly. "Among my people, we do not break them, even in death." The way she spoke, calm and proud even through pain, struck him harder than the storm outside. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. The fire burned brighter, and the silence between them wasn't lonely, it was alive. He didn't know who she was or what her reward meant, but he knew one thing for certain. The night had brought him something he hadn't felt in a long time, a reason to care again. And outside, beyond the small circle of warmth, the blizzard roared on, powerless against the fragile, flickering flame of mercy that had just been lit inside. The fire crackled softly, throwing long, golden shadows across the cabin walls. The storm outside had grown fiercer, hammering the roof with sleet and wind. But inside, warmth returned slowly, painfully, like life returning to a frozen limb. The woman sat close to the hearth, Wrapped in the old wool blanket, steam rose from her damp hair, and her trembling had eased. The rancher poured her a tin cup of hot coffee, his rough hands careful not to startle her. When she took it, her fingers brushed as a small, fragile, but filled with quiet strength. "Drink," he said. "It'll help." She obeyed, her lips barely touching the rim before she pulled back, coughing from the heat. Still, she smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I haven't felt warmth like this in months," she murmured. "You must think I'm cursed." The rancher studied her face. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she was young and no older than 20. "I think you've been through hell," he replied. "You said soldiers took your people. What happened?" Her gaze drifted to the window, where the storm danced against the glass. "They came at dawn," she whispered. "Men with blue coats and guns. They said our land was no longer ours. My husband tried to fight. They shot him. My brother ran and they caught him and made me watch." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "I hid in the hills for days. I ate snow, roots, anything. I thought I would die there." The rancher felt his jaw tighten. He had heard such stories before, whispered by travelers and traders, but hearing it from here, seeing the scars on her wrists and the raw cuts on her feet, made it real in a way she could never forget. "You made it this far alone?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I followed the river. I saw smoke from your chimney. I thought maybe broken bar, maybe you would show mercy." He stirred the fire with the poker, the wood hissing as sparks jumped. "Most folks wouldn't," he said. "You're lucky I did." She tilted her head, her dark hair falling over one eye. "You don't look like a lucky man," she said softly. He almost smiled. "I'm not." For a moment, the storm outside faded into silence between Thema and uneasy peace, fragile as the flame flickering between breaths. Then she reached beneath the blanket and drew out a small pouch of worn leather. She untied it with trembling fingers and held out a single turquoise pendant, smooth and glimmering like frozen water. "I promised reward," she said, her voice firm now. "This is all I have. It belonged to my mother. Take it, and you'll have the blessing of her spirit." The rancher stared at the pendant but didn't take it. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need it when you start over." Her eyes widened, as if no one had ever refused her before. "If I keep it," she whispered, "I'll carry the weight of my debt. My people say that when someone saves your life, you must repay the warmth they gave you, or your spirit never rests." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You don't owe me rest. You owe yourself a chance." For the first time, she looked at him not as a stranger, but as something steadier, a man whose kindness she hadn't expected to find in a world that had turned cruel. "You speak like someone who's lost too," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "Maybe I have." The fire burned lower, and she moved closer, resting her hands near the embers. "What's your name?" she asked. "Eli," he said. "And yours?" She hesitated. "Taya. It means a seed that survives the storm." Eli nodded slowly. "Seems fitting." They sat like that for a long while, two broken souls, thawing together in the warmth of a fragile peace. The wind screamed outside, but inside, something sacred was rebuilding itself, a trust, maybe even hope. When Eli looked at her again, he no longer saw a fugitive or a stranger. He saw a woman who had carried her people's sorrow across miles of frozen earth and still had enough faith left to knock on a door. Taya looked into the fire, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, "for opening the door." Eli said nothing, but in his heart, he felt something stir, a flicker of purpose he hadn't known in years. The storm might rage until morning, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone in it.